Welcome to the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. Mikel B. Classen is an award-winning author, historian, photographer, and publisher whose passion for Michigan's Upper Peninsula shines through every project. He's the author of Grand Island, Island of History and Mystery, Points North, Discover Hidden Campgrounds, Natural Wonders and Waterways of the Upper Peninsula, and Yooper Ale Trails. Mikel joins us to share the stories, history, and hidden treasures that make the Great Lakes region such a remarkable place.
Well, we've hit the 6 o'clock hour, so I suggest we get started here. It sounds like we've got lots of good things to talk about. Contrary to your screen, my name is not Victor Volkman. I'm actually Shirley Frank. I'm the new library director here at the Crystal Falls Library. Evelyn, who's joined the call here, has moved on to more exotic locales. I'll let her talk a little bit about what she's doing here when we get to it. But we are here today to talk about Mikel B. Klassen's book, Piracy on the Great Lakes, True Tales of Freshwater Pirates. And I would hold up a copy, but I can't keep one in our library. It keeps getting checked out. So if you want to hold one up so folks can see it. Excellent.
Just happy to have one handy. Hey.
Well, yeah. Since it's my office, I got to have my books around.
So I thought, Mikel, maybe you want to just kick us off here talking a bit about your process for working on this book and what gave you the idea of piracy and kind of how you got started. And then we can see if anybody has questions or if you want to talk any more in specific about the book.
Well, the book started out a few years back. I did a book called True Tales, and in it is the story of Dan Seavey, the pirate, who used to sail around Escanaba and whatnot. And that book had been out for a couple of years anyway, I think. And the State of Michigan Historical Society somehow got the idea that I was an expert on pirates because I had written that book, and asked me if I would do a presentation at their UP History Conference here in the Sioux at Lake Superior State University. And so I pieced together a presentation on pirates, and it got me digging into all the different stories of piracy and whatnot throughout the Great Lakes. And there was certainly much more of it than I thought there was. And I was really rather amazed with a lot of the stories that I came across. So I put together about I think 4,000 or 5,000 word presentation on the pirates of the Great Lakes and different acts of piracy and that sort of thing. And the lecture was standing room only. And I figured out that, it obviously the subject is really of interest to a lot of people. And so I sent the lecture that I had printed out to Victor for us to take a look at to see, what he thought about it. I was just kind of sending it out for grins, and I figured I was probably going to put it up on my website at some point. And anyway, we decided that there was enough interest and enough concept there to move ahead with the book. So I spent several months expanding on the stories that I had found and finding new evidence to be able to come up with some other stories. And it's kind of been ongoing ever since. So, but it certainly was an awful lot of fun. I mean, pirates, the subject itself is just kind of neat. And I certainly brings out the kid side of writing history, because it's just, it's one of those kind of subjects that kind of enchant you when you're a young kid growing up and that sort of thing. Everybody loves Treasure Island, It was a real good time putting it together and doing the research and whatnot. Sometimes the historical research can be a little mind numbing, but this one was quite entertaining, actually. So,
And I think you mentioned in the book too, there are not a lot of accounts that are out there because there weren't a lot of witnesses that were left alive after many of these attacks.
that's true. The best witnesses are no witnesses. And, and I'm sure tons and tons of stories of piracy on the Great Lakes has been lost just simply because of the nature of piracy, not to get caught, be secret about these things, and we know that a lot of these different activities went on, but we certainly can't pin them on any one individual any more than we already have. There was so much of it going on that um, that's really kind of hard to trace down an awful lot of the individual characters that were involved. The few that we found, though, are really quite fun and quite colorful. I was really pleased with our own Great Lakes pirates and the characters they were and the stories behind them.
Yep. Someone just posted, Eileen posted, isn't the quote, "Dead men tell no tales"?
That's
Apparently
true.
that's true.
That is true. They can't testify in court.
If they make it to court, right?
Well, yeah, that's the whole thing is you got to make sure that they don't make it to court. One of the stories with Dan Seavey is when he uh, kidnapped one of the ships that he had thrown the crew over the side wrapped in chains into Lake Michigan. And so that was when he stole a ship called the Nellie Johnson. And when it came to trying to try him for kidnapping that ship, um, there were no witnesses to testify against him, and they had to let him off. So it's that saying holds true.
That's right. Are there any particular questions that folks have that they would like to ask?
Did you run into any surprises in your research?
Oh yeah, quite a few of them. One of them was the complete lack of law that was on the water. There was only one ship that was out there to patrol anything or to indict anything, chase people down. It was the USS Michigan. It was the lakes. Well, there's actually an argument about this, but it was considered the lake's first ironclad ship that went across the lakes, and it was the first one that actually was armed with guns and all that sort of thing. It was an actual gunship, so they could, they could chase people down. They could put them in the bottom of the lake if they wanted to. But because it had to patrol all four Great Lakes, when it was in one lake, all the other three are wide open to basically a free for all. And certainly there was a lot of that going on. Also, something,
Which lake had the most piracy?
Which lake had the most piracy? I would have to say probably Lake Michigan. Although they were pretty much all the lakes had something going on. But I think that area in Lake Michigan, there in the around the Beaver Islands archipelago and that sort of thing, really seemed to attract an awful lot of pirates. The Mormon King, James Jesse Strang, as well as Dan Seavey, all operated very heavily throughout that whole area of the Beaver Islands, the Garden Peninsula, Escanaba, Door County there in northern Green Bay, and of course across that Charlevoix going down to Grand Haven. There was seemed to be a real haven for pirate activity. But again, we depending upon the times and the era, it really it varied. We had a pirate that was in the Thousand Islands, which is over north of New York. There was, certainly a pirate in Cleveland. We had, one group of pirates that were on Lake Superior. There certainly was some piracy going on in Lake Huron, and the Prohibition pirates were all over the lakes, and anywhere that they could, skate back and forth to Canada as fast as they could get there, there would be Prohibition pirates. So that was, there was a lot going on everywhere.
Were you regretting the prohibition?
Pirates, were they delivering alcohol? Sorry.
Some, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the whole thing with the Prohibition pirates is that because Prohibition was illegal in the United States and it was still legal in Canada, it made it very, very the Canadians would line the docks full of the liquors of your choice, and everybody would be running over wherever it was a short jaunt, like here at the St. Mary's River or the Detroit River, any of those areas where they were very, very close to Canada. They'd hook up speedboats and zip across, get alcohol, and zip it back as quick as they could get it. But if one of the boats happened to be on the way over to Canada, it was full of money. If it was coming back, it was full of booze. So the pirates had, anytime they caught these guys, either way, it was profitable, whether they had the booze or whether they had the money. And in the Detroit River, in 1 year, there was over $212 million worth of booze brought across the river illegally, just in the Detroit River in the 1930s. And you think about how much money that is today. It's literally hits the billions in a year. I mean, it's an insane amount of money. And it was crazy, crazy traffic.
Oh, what can you tell me? How many women were involved in this? Or was it all men?
Mostly men, but not entirely. Certainly, the William Johnson, the Thousand Island pirate, his daughter sailed with him, and was probably as famous as being a pirate with him as he was. But she would be able to go to the shore and pick up news, pick up supplies, things like that, while the rest of her father's gang would be hanging out on the islands. And so she did an awful lot for him, and she was called the Queen of the Thousand Islands, right next to him. Her name was Kate. And I thought it was really fun being able to actually find a woman pirate. They were very few and far between in the Caribbean, and they weren't very prominent here either, but it was still, they were there. And that was kind of fun to really come across. Also, some of the other things that went on that really aren't directly related to any individual pirates, but like the Civil War pirates and the timber pirates also were not only a huge nuisance, but also they operated really heavily for many, many years. Stealing, the timber pirates would steal out anything that wasn't basically anything that was a public land or public tract where they could find lumber. They would pull in 40 acres, throw them on the boat, and get the heck out of there. And it was all illegal cutting and whatnot. But they were, because settlers in those days and in the early days looked at trees as enemies and not something to be preserved or saved. They were looking for farmland and suburban land and things like that. And the faster they could get rid of it, the happier a lot of the members of the community were. So when any of the timber pirates happened to get caught and thrown in jail, frequently the locals would get together and break them out and set them loose, because they were essentially on their side about the whole thing. And the Civil War pirates, there was a prison camp that was on a place called Johnson's Island in Lake Erie. And it was not far off from shore. But the only thing that was basically protecting the island was the USS Michigan. And there was several thousand prisoners there at one point. And there were at least 4 plots to take over the Michigan and then free these prisoners and allow them to basically wreak havoc and open up a fighting front that would have been on the north along the Great Lakes shores, and then work their way back south to throughout the north, again creating as much havoc and destruction as they could in the process. But unfortunately, the Civil War pirates weren't very, very clever or very smart, and ended up every time they tried to do something, it just backfired. As I said in the book, they're the most inept pirates I've ever come across. They're just absolutely awful.
We do have a couple questions in the chat box, if you don't mind. Someone asked, Mary asked, if you'd heard about a tunnel in the basement of the House of Ludington where liquor was delivered during Prohibition.
Yes, and there are a lot of buildings like that. Marquette, Sault Ste. Marie, Escanaba, tons of the places had those things. Here in Sault Ste. Marie, many of the buildings to this day have underground areas that are down there right next to the waterfront and whatnot, which of course they would bring them in. And Marquette had an underground city because the hill was so high there. When you look at Washington Street in Marquette, it's up in the air well above the harbor. And so they basically brought all the cargo in under those buildings into these underground storefronts for all the cars that were on Washington Avenue there, and probably mostly the stuff that was on Front Street as well. They tore up Washington Avenue a few years ago, and you could see the old storefronts buried down underneath where the pavement had been and whatnot, which I really wish they wouldn't have. I would like to have seen that open up. That would have been a heck of an attraction, in my opinion. But those did exist, and most of our harbor cities had places like that. Prohibition in the UP really was something that most places tried their darndest to ignore and participate in the activities of bringing the liquor across and certainly helping consume it as well. So,
Excellent. That sounds very intriguing and interesting. So we had another question from Connie. She wants to know if any pirates stealing things from the UP.
oh yeah, sure. Dan Seavey, the pirate that sailed out of Escanaba, he would basically take anything that wasn't tied down, and a lot that was. His favorite thing would be to go to a port, take anything that could be found on the docks or stray ships, whatever, and take them down a few other ports and resell it all. That was the major activity with a lot of the pirates, is they would just go steal something from one place and go somewhere else and sell it and collect the money that way. Certainly that was what Dan Seavey had in mind with most of the stuff that he did. He is the only pirate to actually be prosecuted for piracy. I mentioned earlier the Nellie Johnson incident, and he had actually, because they couldn't find any of the crew members, they literally had tried him for piracy and it failed. So when he was such a nuisance in stealing stuff, including poaching venison and all sorts of different stuff and taking it down to Chicago, they gave him a badge. They thought that, instead of we can't beat him, let's have him join us. And so next thing you know, he's a marshal. and he goes to round up one of the people that was wanted, had him cornered in a bar in Nobbinway, and the two of them decide that the only way that he's going to go in is if they have a knockdown, drag out brawl. And as the brawl proceeds for about an hour to an hour and a half, them just drinking and beating each other up, occasionally just stopping to throw down a couple of shots and going back to doing that. It was one of CV's favorite things was to fight people. So after a while, he finally gets the guy down, tries to rouse him to go get another drink, and decides, well, he doesn't want him to move, so he sets a piano on the back of his head, and goes over, has a few cocktails, comes back, and of course, this prisoner is dead. And so consequently, his marshaling career was very short-lived. They took his badge away after that, and he went back to doing what he did best, trying to essentially steal ships and steal cargo. He ended up at one point having three or four different ships. I know of at least three of them that he had, and I believe there may have been another one. I'm kind of looking into that a little bit. I still keep researching that character because I have for so many years. I found him back in the 80s, so I've kind of been on that character for a long, long time. And I've always found him to be really fascinating and a lot of fun. There was a saying that Dan Seavey would lend you the shirt off his back, and then you'd steal it back. So he was a pretty bizarre character.
And they couldn't prosecute him for murder, huh?
No.
No.
There's no evidence. There's no witnesses. Like you say, no witnesses are the best witnesses.
All right. We had a couple other questions. Someone wanted to hear some pirate stories about Lake Superior.
There aren't a lot of them, surprisingly enough. Most of Lake Superior and the piracy that went on throughout that region goes back to the fur trade. The early days of the fur trade, when the Hudson Bay Company and the Northwest Fur Company were fighting each other over furs. That was the New World gold at the time. And the canoes that carried the furs could carry tons, literally. I think it was up to 6 tons they could put in one of those boats or in one of those big canoes. The fur trade pirates, these activities, because the Hudson Bay Company was up by St. James Bay, and the Northwest Fur Trade Company, both were English companies, were basically on the southern shore of Lake Superior and up into the Minnesota region. And because they were competing with each other to get the furs, there was no law, so they had no problem killing people and each other over the furs. So it became very, very strange sort of era. In the Apostle Islands, there was a group of pirates that were fur trade pirates, and they would operate out of the Apostle Islands, attacking different convoys of furs and whatnot. They found out that there was a French payroll coming in from Montreal to one of the French outposts that were there, and they ended up robbing the gold from the French payroll, and which, of course, attracted a lot of attention. And not good ones either. They started going out on a search for them. Now, these pirates decided that they were kind of operating under, shall we say, a pen name. They all called themselves the Apostles. and they went by the names of Luke, Mark, John, Matthew, the whole thing, except for some unknown reason, the leader called himself the chief. Apparently, he wasn't willing to go quite as far to call himself Jesus, I guess. But anyway, they were essentially the apostle pirates. And when they looted this French payroll, the French came out, they got them, took them back to, they, when they were taken to Montreal, of course, they were all hanged, except for the chief, who apparently was related to the commandant at the fort at Montreal, and just kind of disappeared, apparently. But it is said that that is where the name for the Apostle Islands comes from, is the Apostle Pirates. Now, I'm not so sure that's quite true, but I found one source for this, and that was about it. But the source was the Bayfield, Wisconsin Historical Society. So I'm going to have to go with it. At least they think it's true. I would tend to believe that it was just the Apostle Islands were named as the Jesuits came through and threw another religious name on another landmark, as they were naming everything as they came through, oftentimes after a saint or something like that. So I could see that happening.
I have a question, Michael. Many years ago, I read the book The King of Confidence, which was all about the Mormon king that you mentioned in your piracy book. And that was a huge, fascinating tome of a book. Did you find anything else interesting that you wanted to share about him that didn't make your piracy book?
Not a great deal. He's really well written about.
Okay.
I have about a half a dozen books devoted to him. The difference is that most of them focus on the Mormonism, and they don't
Mm,
really talk about the piracy at all and the wild things that they were doing out of the Beaver Islands with trying to drive people out, or if you lived on the island and you weren't part of the Mormons, you still had to comply with the Mormon laws and all that sort of thing. And if they didn't, they were whipped and beaten, and a lot of corporal punishment, that sort of thing. But I found several firsthand accounts of sailors and their ships coming close to the islands. One of them.
I think we're gonna intermittently lose Michael here for another part.
yeah, but if anyone was interested and you like biographies, that was a really good book, The King of Confidence. And it was, I mean, I guess, yes, it did concentrate more on him and his Mormon life, but I think the book was sort of written to kind of show that throughout history, especially in American history, we have picked up leaders that are very confident men that do atrocious things that nobody can quite believe. And that was a book that I think came about due to our current political climate, and that was more the link there. But it was a very good read.
All right. I am sharing a picture of William Bully Hayes, who we'll ask Michael about when he becomes audible again. This guy was so popular, there was even pulp novels or comic books written about him. I'm not sure. So he'll be our next pirate to talk about when Michael comes back.
They're all very clean cut looking gentlemen, right? Like some of these don't look like the typical archetypical pirate.
Yeah, you couldn't pick him out of a crowd, for having funny hair or whatever.
Peg leg or a hook or a
I
I
think
think
Michael's
I'm back
back.
for a minute.
We were just going to ask you about William Bully Hayes, if you're done with the straying.
Oh, yeah. Bully Hayes was a character that started out in Cleveland, Ohio, and would do piracy that was very similar to what Dan Seavey was doing, where he would go along, sail, pick stuff up off from docks, move down a few ports, resell them, and that sort of thing. But he eventually um, crossed the wrong people and had to leave the Great Lakes and went to the South Seas and became one of the most famous South Seas pirates there was. They even wrote dime novels about him, Bully Hayes, back in in the night around the turn of the century and stuff like that, when dime novels were really really popular. In the book, there's a picture of the one of the covers from the Bully Hayes book. Um, have you got it there, Victor? Or
Yep, just came up.
Ah,
yeah, and it's that looks pretty representative to what they were. But the South Seas, just like the Caribbean, was a very very active place for piracies and pirates. The term "shanghaied" and um, things like that were certainly attributed to those regions. There's more wild waters that we had, but um, he started out here, here in the Great Lakes, just like so many of the others. He just went on to other places because life got too hot for him.
Wait, had a couple more questions in the chat here, Michael. Joan wants to know if you're going to be at Wild Blueberry in Paradise this weekend.
I am not. Um, it's actually one of the first years I'm going to miss it, but um, it's a really, really heavy festival, and it is hard work. And since I got hurt last year, I decided that um, I'm going to avoid a lot of the heavier festivals this year and try to finish recovering from my back going out on me. And outdoors festivals are becoming very, very difficult to do, particularly because all of a sudden we're starting to have more high winds and things like that, where your tent tends to blow away into one of the Great Lakes, and which isn't fun and costly. So no, I
You
won't
need a
be at.
ship.
What's that?
I said you need your own ship.
Yeah, that would be nice. But I do a lot of festivals and events. I've done a lot of bookstore events this year, which actually more than usual. And I'll end up doing several more towards the end of the year. I'll end up being in Marquette for the TV6 shows that I do at Christmas. I'll be in Frankfurt, not Frankenmuth, in October, as well as Gaylord and Escanaba on Black Friday. So I will be cruising around doing some things, adding a few things here and there.
Excellent.
Yep.
We had a couple other questions. If people want to pipe up and ask their questions, that's welcome as well. Otherwise, I can read them from the chat. Anybody want to join in and ask a question?
sure, I'll ask.
All right.
You can hear me. So I recall a short history book about Kentucky leggers, somewhere in the Hurley, Wisconsin area, if I'm recalling correctly. And I'm wondering if they're Capone related and if there are any superior area rum running tales associated with all of that.
Um, Certainly, there are Lake Superior. There was a lot of rum running going on. And as well here at the St. Mary's River, there was a ton of it going on. But a lot of boats would come over from Canada and places like Grand Island and whatnot. They have caves on the north side of the islands, and people would frequently, or the Canadians would frequently come over and drop them off, and then someone would go out evening after dark and pick them up and bring them ashore to one of the local speakeasies. Hurley is notorious for everything. It it is a town that is much more colorful than Seney was, and Seney was rough. I Hurley is actually to this day a lot of fun. I went over to Ironwood to try and do just a focus piece on the community there in Ironwood. I kept going around to everybody, so what do you do around here? In the evenings, what do you do for fun? We go to Hurley. And literally everybody that I asked, we go to Hurley. So apparently nobody does anything in Ironwood and everybody does everything in Hurley. So, but there are certainly, Capone related incidents up here, as there are with a lot of the gangsters, from the Purple Gang to John Dillinger, Al Capone. All of them had presences up here, and part of it was because of all the liquor being run across from Canada. And it was so remote at the time. We don't have a lot of roads now. They had a whole lot less back then. And it was not easy to police the area. There was so much wilderness and so many places that were hard to get to that it made illegal activities like that much, much easier. I'm also currently working on a story of one of John Dillinger's right-hand men that was here at the Sioux, and I'm learning about how much activity John Dillinger had here, as well as his members of his gang also were in the area. But Capone, it was an easy drive for Capone's people to come up from Chicago up through Wisconsin into that West End. So definitely, they were busy up here.
I have a question.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? This has been very interesting. I love the book. Gave a copy to our son for Christmas.
Great.
He's been into pirates since he was 10 years old, and now he's in his 50s. So he's delighted to get that book and amazed that there were pirates in the Great Lakes. This isn't as exciting a question as some that we've had. Where on earth did you get most of your research for this book? There, like you said, most everybody was dead that were witnesses. Where did you find research?
Well, it wasn't easy in a lot of cases. I'll freely admit that, but I tend to go to newspaper articles, and I have a large collection of old history books here that date back to easily the 1850s and earlier. And when you find a history book that goes back that far, and there wasn't a lot of history here yet in that sense. You find a lot of obscure stories, native lore, all that type of thing that is, working on 200 years old at this point. I spend a lot of time with that. And I also came across a publication called the Inland Seas Quarterly, which is put out by the Great Lakes Maritime Museum over in Ohio. And they've been publishing since 1944. It's very, very similar to the Michigan History Magazine, in the sense that they publish a lot of different articles and things just in general about Michigan history. Theirs is just tons of stuff about maritime history across the Great Lakes, and some of the information I was able to glean from some of those. I have a large batch of them now, particularly the earlier stuff that's 1970s on back to the 1940s. I'm finding just a lot of fascinating stuff in those. I collect local centennial books. How the little communities will print these centennial books, and they only just have a few, and then they go out of print, and you never see them again. I have a real large collection of those too as well, which helps me follow up stories in a community. If I can get like a name, a date, and a rough idea of something that happened, I can usually begin to chase it down. And now that we're also starting to see more organizations like Uplink, which are putting online old newspapers, old historical photos, things like that. That is also helping make our research a little bit easier. Even though it's time consuming, they're getting there. And I really appreciate a lot of these places that are starting to do that. I know a large amount of the Upper Peninsula's historical societies are allowing access to Uplink for documents and their archives. And so for me, it's huge and a major help. I did a talk over at Bayless when Uplink first came up here about preserving historical photos and how important it was for people to, label your pictures, sorts of different, label them, date them, name them, all that kind of thing. Because, sometimes like I also collect historical pictures.
Yes, I know.
And so many of them have absolutely no information on them other than a title. If I can find one that says, that has a date, a place, I'm just absolutely ecstatic because I can usually follow that image up then. Those kinds of things. But I do a lot of that stuff, just chasing stuff down and trying to research it out. I've always kind of had the philosophy of that if I find this to be interesting or kind of fascinating, somebody else will too.
Yeah.
And, try to put it out. I also realize that a lot of these stories are on the verge of being lost permanently. And part of it is attempting to find, it's one of the reasons I focus on as many lost stories and forgotten stories as I can. Is I'm looking to make sure that that doesn't happen. Our history stories are lessons, and for us to discard that or lose that through neglect or inactivity, I think that's really hard. And so I try my best to help along with that. I know a few of the other authors that are out there are looking at things the same way because we have this conversation about things about to be lost a lot. So
Wow. Thank you for what you do.
Related to Sue's question, do you have, I know that a lot of research is a pretty tedious slog. I'm working on a historical fiction piece right now too. And do you have a story of a particularly fortuitous discovery that can be encouraging?
well, yeah, a lot of my discoveries in the long run have been fortuitous, I would say, in that sense. I've been really lucky with some of the stories that I've come across, and a lot of it has to do with just, again, I say that I bought a lot of out of print history books. I just got one that was published about 1880, which is a who's who of the Upper Peninsula. And it's got bios on everyone that is anybody all across the UP in 1880. Well, I'm going through this one. It's this lawyer from Newberry, turns out to be sort of a Perry Mason kind of character. But there was a little line in it that he talked about that one of his credits was that he got the train robbers off up in Calumet. And I'm like, what? Train robbers? Calumet? So we ended up taking off the story, and it's one of my backbone pieces in my next True Tales books is the train robbery up in Calumet. Turns out it was just a magnificent Jesse James style train robbery, masked guns, the whole kind of thing. And when the train was robbed, it was insured by the Pinkertons. So Alan Pinkerton's son, William Pinkerton, comes up here himself to solve the case. And one of the wonderful things about him doing that, besides the fact that he's historically, a great character, um, the Pinkertons have put online their case records, and it has Pinkerton's own version of the train robbery. So you can take that and intersperse that with the newspaper articles, which are abundant at the time, and all of a sudden you got something. But it comes just from one line in one old book that I just happened to be digging through to see what I had. And that's, that happens to me occasionally. You just come across those kind of things that all of a sudden you go, what? And you're off, you're off after something, and down the rabbit hole, so to speak.
Yep, down the rabbit hole. That's
Right.
perfect. Thank you. That's very inspirational. That'll keep me going.
Good. Glad to hear it. Yeah, I really do not find this tedious. I know a lot of people hate research and going in there, but for me, it's solving mysteries. You're going out, you're just looking for clues for stuff, and these fascinating stories. And the more you find, the more exciting it gets. And that's really kind of how I look at all this. Is you just as you're getting into these stories and you find this and then, oh wow, and then you find this, ooh, this is even better. You're off to see the wizard. It's great. And that's essentially how I write the history.
I love research too.
Yeah,
I'm
me
a
too.
research nut too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
one
love
of
learning things.
Well, yeah, as well as
Delving.
again, all of a sudden you get these stories that pop up out of places that you're going, oh my god, in my first True Tales book, there's a story in there about Angelique and Charlie Mott starving on Isle Royale, and it's in Angelique Mott's own words, and I never changed a word of it. It's just so compelling reading her version of the story. But I found this in an old book of the biography of Peter White, which was printed in, I think, 1902 or 1903. And there are just tons of completely unrelated footnotes throughout the whole thing. Some of these footnotes literally run pages. And one of those footnotes was the story of Angelique Mott in her own words. And subsequent editions of that book removed almost all of those footnotes. And every one of them are just all these different stories from across Lake Superior. And they're wonderful to read. But the Angelique Mott story not only has, helped True Tales, I have it on my website, michaelbclassen.com. And it is the single most hit page on my website, as well as it is well over 50,000-60,000 hits by itself. It was just a footnote in a book, but it is one of the most compelling stories I've ever read in my life. And apparently that works for other people too, because like I say, it's been just crazy on my website. When in the book, people quite often come up to me and talk to me about that story, because it's brutal, it's raw. It's a great piece of work. But again, it's just another one of those kind of things where it just kind of pops out of nowhere. And you end up having you found a diamond in the rough.
I really enjoyed your True Tales book, and I'm looking forward to the next one. So let us know when it's coming.
It's coming soon. I'm almost done with it.
Oh,
To the
great.
point where I'm just like almost done with it.
Yeah. I'm one of
Um,
those people that's really into history too. So, yeah.
the true tales are always fun to write because you just come up with
Yeah.
some really odd stuff from time to time, as well as just stories that if I would have sent them as fiction pieces to an editor, they would have shook their head and said, "Nah, this ain't nah, this is believable," and it's true. It's the whole thing that it's truth is sometimes stranger than fiction.
That's a good quote, all right. Yeah, I was doing some family history research that I found, and it's like, that couldn't have really happened, could it? It's like my great grandmother floated across the bay in Texas. She can't even swim. It's like, well, no, it really happened.
That would have been
Anyway,
an ordeal there. That's
yeah.
uh,
Well, it's in one of my books. Actually, the one
Uh,
that just came out. Yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
Michael,
yeah.
got a couple of questions for you. One is, did you find anything out about what the guys did in winter when, because obviously they couldn't sail? And the other question I have is during the Prohibition, what was the status of federal law enforcement on the Great Lakes for that?
Well, I'll answer your winter question first. Um, they didn't do much. You couldn't put the ships up, so people like Dan Seavey, he would hold fights out on the ice. He'd get somebody in town that thought they could knock his block off, and he'd gladly go out there and he'd have these big fight exhibitions on the ice on the bay in Escanaba and just have knockdown dragouts, and then of course retire off to the bars and probably continue the whole thing later. But for the most part, pretty much had to wait till spring thaw to be able to go out and do much. They always said that Dan Seavey was the last one in the winter and frequently came in with ice on the spars and up in the rigging and all of that. So he definitely was a rugged sailor for his day. And the whole thing with uh, prohibition, it's like I said earlier, the um, remoteness and the fact that it wasn't, really able to be patrolled. It was really, really hard. The Coast Guard itself was on the water, but the law enforcement on the ground was really pretty shabby. The Coast Guard was out, of course, running up and down, but they only had so many ships compared to all the locals getting involved. One of the things in doing the research about this right hand man of Dillinger's, one of the reasons he got involved in bootlegging and whatnot in the first place before he met Dillinger is because all his neighbors were making more money than he was working in the Bloody Garden. He'd had it, and he was off to smuggle booze and was making a heck of a lot more money. And eventually, of course, would be arrested, and that's how he ends up meeting Dillinger. But virtually everybody that uh, lived along these lake shores were involved. And so it's such a job that it was too overwhelming for the police. And of course, you had an awful lot of the local police were involved. They were drinkers too, as well as it was a lot of money for them to keep their mouths shut. Um, many of them were making just as much cash as um, anybody else. So, it was one of the reasons why it was such a big thing when Elliot Ness and his Untouchables came in. They were supposedly uncorruptible. And for them to have such a difficult time putting together a small group of people that's uncorruptible in those days really kind of tells you how bad it was.
Well, I think we're wrapping up the end of our hour here, and obviously this is a fascinating topic. We have tons of interest. We could probably continue on quite a bit longer here, but I do want to thank Michael and for joining us here and talking about his process and his books and his experience. Thank you very much. It's been really enlightening, and I appreciate you sharing where you're going to be coming up in the future here. Is there anything you want to say to the group before we wrap up and talk about what's coming up next month?
Well, I kind of wanted to throw this out here. It's my brand new book. It's essentially a history as well as an exploration guide on Grand Island, which is in the bay at Munising. Most people drive by it, see it, think that it looks kind of cool, and keep moving on. And it's really quite a spectacular place to go and spend a little time. It's also very historically significant for Lake Superior as being one of the very first places to be settled. They were in the Williams family that settled it, were invited there by the local natives to come and settle there and live with them. It's really kind of a fun story, and that's we just released that a couple of months ago, and I'm hoping a few people will pick it up and go over to the island and use it until it's good and dog-eared. It's
My
it's
cousin Sam wants to take me over there.
yeah, I spent about a week
Yeah,
out, and it was really, really extraordinary. I enjoy it a lot, and those kinds of things are kinds of places out there are really fun to explore. But because it's a recreation area, a lot of the paths are paved, as well as you're allowed to have bikes on there. You can bring your kayak over. Of course, there's camping places on the island. It's really quite an extraordinary experience to go actually spend some time there. They even have cabins that you can rent out there and spend some time in the cabins, which is what I did when I went. And then, of course, coming up soon, I'm going to have a new True Tales book, which I'm really, like I said, quite looking forward to. There's a lot of really, really good stories buried in there this time. Personally, I really think that True Tales 1 was a very, very good book, and I think True Tales 2 is going to be better. So,
something to look forward to. A couple things to look forward to. Thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate that.
Hey, no problem. Really enjoyed it. I always enjoy coming out for stuff like this. If only my internet would behave, it'd be a lot more pleasant experience for everybody.
Technology always fails us, right?
Yeah.
And so I just want to mention, thank you, Michael. I want to mention next month on the 10th, we're talking about enduring legacies. It's the people of the 1926 Barnes-Hecker mine disaster from Mary Tippett, who's on the call. So Mary will be able to tell us about her process and delving into history in that particular topic. So sounds like another fascinating tour into what's been going on. Mary, do you have any ticklers for us, Mary, before we log off for the evening?
Oh, yes, it's hard to say a couple of words because there's so much to say. My grandfather was one of the men who died in the Barnes-Hecker mine cave-in 1926. It was his first day working in the mine, even though he was not a stranger to mining. He had worked on mining before. But as I was listening to all the talk about crime and so forth in the UP, my grandpa Walter Tippett served on the Marquette police force at a time when 3 members of the Marquette force, or the police chief and his civilian son, and my grandpa's partner, Tom Thornton, were involved in foiling a robbery, and my grandfather was the one who shot and killed the perpetrator. He, having been a man who wanted to go into the ministry at one time, felt a tremendous internal struggle about having killed a man, and he then went to work at the prison. And so the stories that he had from his time at the prison really kind of linked in with some of the piracy stuff, not necessarily that it was piracy, but there were some family concerns here in Ishpeming that brought my grandparents back from Marquette to Ishpeming, and that's when the two brothers were mine captains at the Barnes Hecker and one at the Lloyd mine, hired him to go to work. And so our family was one of the ones who talked about what happened. Other families did not. Many of the widows were fluent in their native languages of Finnish and Italian and so forth. And so some of the lore didn't come down the pike. One of the fun things for me was the tiny little tidbits of things that never would have been known. As an example, one of the widows in the 1930s would have her quilting friends come over and they would listen to ghost stories on the radio. Well, who knew that? There was no radio here until 1931. So there are all these little tiny tidbits of juicy little things that I have a lot of fun with. And so now, having been able to talk with 26 of the families, there were 51 men who died, 41 men were still interred in the mine. And there's a beautiful, beautiful effort underway to make that into a memorial park. That's been a desire and a heartfelt wish for 100 years, because the mine until recently was on private property. Separate story. Anyway, if you get me started, it's pretty hard to make me stop. So I'll stop there.
Evelyn did you want to jump in?
Well, I just want to say thank you, Mary. Normally we start the talk with Victor giving us a little UPA news because he is one of our sponsors. UPA is one of our sponsors. Victor, briefly, is there anything that we need to know from UPA?
Well, we are still taking entries for the UP Reader. This is issue volume number 10. You have until November 10th to write a story, poem, personal memoir, childhood stories of crazy things we did as children. That's my favorite genre. You can just join UPA, become a member at UPPAA.org/join, and you can submit your work to the UP Reader and also attend our spring conference in beautiful Marquette on May 16th, 2027. The conference attendance is included in the price of your membership. So it's a great bargain, and we'd love to have you join us. Even if you haven't started writing yet, please take a look at UPA. Thank you.
Nice. Any other closing words from you, Victor?
No, I'm really looking forward to next month with Mary. We're going to rock it.
Excellent. Well, thanks to everybody for joining. We had a great big group today. It's wonderful. So hope to see you all next time as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks.